Warning, today's video is gonna be rough. There are some things that I messed up a bunch, and I'm gonna make fun of myself for doing it. Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my October 2020 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with my nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you need to go back to a book or you need to skip a book, that's all down below. On the way down to checking out the description, make sure that you are subscribed because YouTube sometimes likes to unsubscribe people and I find that kind of rude. In October, I read 12 books for a total of 3,910 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 2,271 of those pages were actually about 60 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 100% adult books, hence why this graph is extremely boring. I read 11 novels and 1 graphic novel, making this graph slightly less pathetic. This month, the biggest chunk of the genre pie was horror and nonfiction, followed by fantasy, historical fiction, science fiction, and mystery thriller. If you adjust by page count, not much changes. Most of these books were from the library, but I had a few from publishers and one I had already owned. I read 7 audiobooks, 2 paperbacks, 2 ebooks, and 1 hardcover. The biggest chunk of my books were in the 300 to 399 page range, and although I read a lot of new releases, I actually read books from other decades. The majority of these books were written by female authors, but it was an even split between male and female protagonists. In terms of setting, the US continues to dominate this graph, followed by France, Japan, other worlds, the UK, and Canada. In terms of diversity of subject matter, a big chunk had none to speak of, but I did slip in a few translated works, some queer books, and one that prominently featured mental health. In terms of star ratings this month, I had 1 2.5 star read, 3 3-star reads, 4 3.5 star reads, 2 4-star reads, and 2 4.5 star reads, which means that I didn't have any 5-star reads this month. Let's start with our lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? Obviously, this was a little bit of a weird month for me. This is about half as many books as I have typically read in previous years around this time. And that's one, because this year in general, I'm not going to read more than 200 books, which is something I haven't done in the last 5 years. That's partly an intentional effort to read fewer things because I've been very stressed out about the fact that sometimes I have to wrap up 30 books in a month. Not to mention, I think my brain is pretty full capacity, so I don't know how much more that I can shove in there and still have recall on it. And more often than not, when I'm cross-stitching, instead of listening to a book, I'm listening to a true crime YouTube video, or several videos as it were. However, the biggest reasoning for me reading 12 books this month and so many audiobooks is because I was on a road trip. We drove all the way up to the Northwest Territories, which is about 24 hours from where I live, solid driving. So obviously we had to stop a bunch of times, we spent some time there, we drove around in the Northwest Territories, we came back. So yeah, a significant amount of this month was spent in the car, and a significant amount of the audiobooks I read were in the car with Chad. Which leads us to the first book on this list, and my 2.5 star book, South of the Border, West of the Sun. I let Chad pick this book because he's read this author before and really enjoyed things by this author. I've read one other thing by this author and I found it kind of weird, but I think that's kind of Murakami's bag. And this is another one that was kind of weird, but more in the I really didn't care about the protagonist being a whiny little bitch boy. This one follows a large swath of the lifetime of the protagonist from when he's a little boy and he has this friend and he has kind of a crush on her, but then he moves school and he doesn't see her again, and then eventually he sleeps with somebody who is his girlfriend's cousin, and we don't even get to know that person's name because why would we have to know that person's name? And then eventually he gets married, but then he reconnects with that girl that he knew when he was a child, and there might be some cheating going on and whether or not she disappears from his life, and like honestly I just didn't really care. This had elements of beautiful writing in it, and there were kind of other aspects where you're like, wait, is this happening or is this happening? And some of that was intriguing, but ultimately I just didn't give a crap what this character did. On to my 3-star reads, the first one being A Missing Millionaire. This is a true crime story that took place in Ontario about 100 years ago. It's basically this guy owned a bunch of theaters and theater properties, and he sold, I think, a portion of them for $1 million, put that check in the bank and then disappeared, and to this day nobody knows what happened to him. There was some speculation that his previous assistant might have offed him and stolen some war bonds, but if he was going to steal just some war bonds and this guy was worth $1 million 100 years ago, that doesn't seem to really pan out. Additionally, this guy was having an affair, so do we suspect the wife? Who even knows at this point? I realized that Ambrose Small, which I believe was his name, it was definitely Ambrose, I'm pretty sure his surname was Small, was actually a character in a book that I think I had to read about 20 years ago called In the Skin of a Lion. I'm pretty sure I had to read it for university. But either I read it and I've forgotten it because it's been so long, or I didn't read it and just felt like it was something that I should have read around that time. But apparently this guy actually shows up as a character in that, and it's kind of an imagining of what might have happened to him. So I might have to read that at some point. I mostly picked this up because I'm on a very big true crime kick, and this is a true crime from Canada, so I'm trying to find some more of those just so I know more things that happened in this country. Next we have The Stars in Their Eyes. This one was newly published this month, and it's a science fiction that has to do with aliens, which I definitely didn't know going into it. I knew that it was queer, and I knew it was sci-fi, and that's all I knew going into it, but once you get in you realize that for a while now aliens have been on Earth, and that is obviously changing the way that things go. People are in hiding, people are basically scavenging around, and as we meet our main character, she's woken up in this warehouse and she doesn't know how she got there, but she's pretty injured and she is trying to escape from people who are clearly trying to do her harm, and then trying to find her girlfriend, and she can't remember the last time she saw her. She just knows she needs to get back to their place so that they can meet back up again and make sure that her girlfriend is okay. However, when she gets back to where she's camping, there's somebody else living in her camp, and then things ensue from there. This one has some twists and some turns, and very early on I thought I knew what the major twist was going to be to do with the girlfriend, and I wasn't correct. So I enjoyed that I didn't just know all the way along how it was gonna go. The writing wasn't anything super special in this one. Also, I had a couple of issues with the timeline, but I was reading an arc, so there's a chance that all of those errors that I kind of picked up on were fixed in the arc, or I just wasn't understanding, because that happens sometimes too. My final 3-star read this month was something I read for my 40 Before 40 TBR, which I will link down below for you in case you don't know about that project, but that was Ghost Story by Peter Straub. This was originally recommended to me last year when I asked for people to recommend me ghost stories, and this one is obviously very aptly named. This is a horror book that is over 500 pages, and even though we have so many pages, I didn't really care about the characters because I didn't really get to know them all that well, and most of them died by the end of the book. I kind of liked the idea of where this was going, this very deep-seated evil that keeps coming back in kind of a cyclical manner, but attacking certain people and reappearing in their lives and that type of thing. That was kind of interesting to me. But again, I didn't really feel an attachment to the people in this small town that kept getting murdered off for seemingly no reason, so it didn't really have that much of an impact on me. On to my 3.5-star reads, the first one being the one graphic novel that I read this month, and that's Children of the Woods. When I was originally tidying up my spreadsheet to make sure I had all of my stats in order, I originally looked at this title and went, what was that again? Which just goes to show you that either 1, my brain is slipping, or 2, this didn't have that much of an impact on me. Upon reflection, I do remember what this was about. It starts out with this guy that's being heavily bullied, but he has a crush on this girl at school and he tries to tell her, but then that girl's boyfriend kind of beats him up, and then there's some magic to try to fix some problems, and as we know, that never works out. And then that girl's trying to figure out what happened to that boy, and then people get attacked, there's goriness, there's an ancient evil. It was kind of fun, but again, it didn't really stick with me too much. I had to think about it and go, oh yeah, it was that one. Sure, I read it, whatever. What the fuck? Oh shit. Okay, this is something completely hilarious to me. I listened to 2 different true crime books, and when I did that this month, they were both books that I just sat on my couch and listened to all of them while I was cross-stitching and working. And back earlier when I talked about the missing millionaire under the last category, the 3-star category, that wasn't the placement for the missing millionaire. The placement for the missing millionaire is actually in this category in the 3.5s. The book that I should have been talking about back in the 3 stars was An Unexplained Death. This one has to do with this guy guy that disappeared and then his body was found in the Belvedere Hotel, which I believe is in Baltimore, Maryland, if I'm remembering correctly. And this is a true crime case that I had actually heard of before, and then I think that somebody might have recommended specifically this book about this case. And then it's something I put on a hold at the library, and eventually the hold came in and I listened to it. This one is kind of interesting, but it's one of those true crime cases that mixes in a little bit of what was going on with the author at the time, which is not necessarily my favorite thing. Granted, the author of this book actually lives in the Belvedere, so when this person went missing and when this person was found, she actually lived there, so she can give a little bit of that experience, but every once in a while there was a little bit more than just, oh, I happen to live here at the time, thrown in there. And I always find that a little bit weird when the person really doesn't have anything really to do with the true crime case besides they happen to be around. In any case, at this point, there's some people that are truly in the he was murdered camp, and there's some people that were truly in the he took his own life camp, and really we honestly don't know which one it is. On the day he went missing, his wife was out of town, there was somebody else staying with him, and he got a phone call, and it was basically very panicked, like, okay, I'll be there in just a moment, and he leaves the house and he never comes back. When his body was found about 10 days later, it was actually found in this kind of office inside this hotel, because apparently he either jumped or was pushed off the parking structure next door, or possibly the roof of the hotel itself. And his body went through this roof into this room that I actually believe used to have an old swimming pool. I think that's what the room was. So his body was found, and there's all this speculation as to if all of those injuries happened in the fall or not, and he used to work for this company that's had some shady dealings, and then other people have been like, oh yeah, you don't want to go up against that company because everybody knows that that company is shady, and like, you don't want to get involved, you're gonna get killed off next. So basically there were a bunch of different weird things about this that make it that it might have been murder, but then also spontaneous suicide is a thing that has happened, and he had some debts, so there's people on both sides, and I honestly don't know which side to fall on. Even after finishing this book, I don't really know where I fall. Again, I just find it very, very funny that I went, yes, that was the true crime one, and then started talking about the opposite true crime book that I was supposed to be talking about in those two spots. I'm not even gonna fix it. Although that is going to make the chapter markers really annoying, so either you've seen this in the right order, or you've seen this out of order, and I've put some notes in the chapter markers. Next we have another nonfiction book, and that's In Defense of Witches. This one was actually translated from French, and this one has to deal with the witch archetype and the different things that people associate with witches and how that has been put upon women throughout time who don't conform to certain societal norms. For example, this talked about women who choose to remain childless and how that is sometimes looked down upon in our society, or previously in societies where people have thought, like, if you don't have children, if you're not rearing children, then you're just kind of off in the woods doing your own thing, and that's kind of weird. You're not fulfilling this role that we've decided that you should fulfill, so we've decided that you're strange. It also talked of ageism, because when we think of witch, we think of old lady, and again, sometimes our society doesn't really think, oh yeah, this person is still valuable, so there's that whole thing. There were, I think, 3 different main things that were associated with typical witches, if you will, and then talked about in this book. This book was very academic, so it took me quite a while to get through it just because I'm not used to reading that type of material anymore. But it brought up a lot of valid points, and there were a lot of points where I went, yep, this is something I have definitely experienced, so it was interesting reading. It just took me a little while to get through. The final 3.5-star read on this list is Night Watch by Terry Pratchett. This is one of the Guards books in the Discworld series, and it's my first Guards book. It is number 29 in the series as a whole, and this is another one I listened to in the car with Chad while we were on the road trip. Given that I've only read books in the Witches series before, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into with this one. I kind of knew the writing style I was getting into, which is a writing style that I do really enjoy, but I didn't really know, other than they were going to be the city guards, what I was getting into. And this one was entertaining. There was an element of magical time travel to do with this one. So at the beginning we meet this guy, he's really high up in the force, he's really respected, and they, on that particular day, are actually reflecting on something that happened previously that a bunch of them were there for, and there was this big revolution type of thing that happened, and they are kind of looking down on other people that are wearing the ribbons for it when they were people that weren't there. And he's reflecting on this old boss he had that he really looked up to that unfortunately died during that time frame. However, he magically goes back in time while he's in pursuit of a criminal, and he finds himself a couple of days before that revolution and realizes that the person that he idealized and the person that he thought was a great boss was in fact him. There were a lot of fun details to this. There were a lot of points I laughed out loud. I did at the time feel it was a little bit long for my taste, which probably had to do with the fact that we were listening to it in the car, and occasionally I would fall asleep a little bit because I was the passenger, I was not driving, don't worry about that. So I feel like there were probably a couple of things I missed to really tie it together, in all fairness. I did find this very entertaining, but again, a little bit long. There were a couple of side plots that I was just like, this didn't really need to be here. On to my 4-star reads, the first one being Mother Thing by Ainsley Hogarth. This is a book that has to do with this woman who has moved in with her mother-in-law and her husband, obviously, to take care of the mother-in-law because she's been going through a very low point in her mental health. And this is something that is really affecting her husband because her husband, when he was living with his mother originally, kind of was at the whim of her mental health, and his mental health was also affected. So the fact that they are there is good so they can help the mother, but it's also not good for the husband. Unfortunately, this book kind of opens with a scene where the mother-in-law has done something to inflict harm upon herself, so trigger warnings for that type of thing. There's also lots of other things that happen in this book that are very potentially triggering. So like every horror book, make sure to check trigger warnings that are particular to you, because this went in a very dark place near the end that I did not see coming. What I really liked about this book is it explored motherhood through a few different lenses, whether that being a child who has a mother that is pretty absentee or in fact terrible, as you come to learn, or trying to make a relationship with your mother-in-law, trying to become a mother yourself. All of these type of things were kind of mixed into the narrative of this character, and I found it very interesting. It went to some dark, gross places, and ultimately I was highly entertained. Another audiobook we listened to in the car was A Lullaby for Witches. This is a dual timeline book about two women. One of them is named Augusta. She's living in our time frame, and she's living in Massachusetts. She's been working at this place in Salem where they give tours of this old jail, and people are always asking her, like, were the witches kept here? And that's a thing that I always hate, because the people that were killed during that time frame for being witches weren't actually witches, so if we could stop calling them that, that'd be really cool. And because she has some schooling to do with archives and stuff like that, she also kind of has that feeling, because this jail didn't exist until like 10 years after those witch trials, so it really has nothing to do with that. She doesn't really like this job. She ends up moving on from this job to this other historical site, and while she's there, some weird things start happening. The other part of our dual timeline is a woman named Margaret, who lived in that house about 150 years previously. The way she was treated, the secrets she uncovered, and different things to do with her life that ultimately impact the life of Augusta 150 years later. This was fun. I liked seeing these two different women and what their lives were like. I liked seeing how they ultimately connected. I had a really good time with this one. It went in a place where I went, oh, of course this is gonna happen. Oh, why didn't I think that this was going to happen? When a certain thing happened to really progress the plot and really bring these characters together. And again, I was just entertained. This was a good month for just being entertained. We only have 2 books left, and they're both 4.5-star books. These could have gone in either order, but I just had to write them down in an order, so penultimately we're talking about The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes. This is the second book by Cat Sebastian in a certain series. I can't remember what the series is called. It's probably called The Highwaymen Robbers or something like that. The first book was The Queer Principles of Kit Webb, and this is following characters that we met in that book. So, although these are companion novels, you really do need to read the first book before reading this one, because this one takes place kind of during the same time frame as that book, and it completely wrecks plot points for the first book if you haven't read it first. So definitely read that one first, because they're both excellent, so you should just do that. Something I found absolutely hilarious when I was about 3/4 of the way through this book is I suddenly realized that our heroine is named Marion, our hero is named Rob, and he has a history of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. I wonder what tale that could be. And at the end of this, there may or may not be a band of merry thieves. Who knows? This book has to do with Marion. She's going through some hard times. She found out something about her husband in the first book, which I won't wreck for you, and she's trying to rectify that situation so her life will be okay. And she's a very standoffish, she doesn't let her guard down type of person, and I really like seeing that kind of representation because I can understand a person like that pretty clearly. This picks up from events from the first book that I won't tell you about because major spoilers for the first book, but essentially these characters end up going on a little bit of an adventure together. We get to know a lot more about them as characters, and I just very much enjoyed this, and I very, very much hope that this series is going to continue because I will read anything else from this series because it's very entertaining. Like the first book, we have queer representation in this book as well in a historical fiction. I just love that. And then of course the whole Robin Hood connection was very entertaining to realize. The other book that I gave 4.5 stars to this month was The Woman in the Library. Now this is a book, when I originally heard of it, I was all in on what I thought the premise was going to be. I knew that it was kind of a closed room mystery. I knew that it took place in the Boston Public Library, which is a place that I've actually been, so I can picture it. That was cool for me. And going into it, that's basically what I knew, and that's sort of what this is, but it's not quite. So I can see why some people would be disappointed that it wasn't exactly what it said on the tin. Essentially, it does start out as these 4 different people in the reading room of the Boston Public Library, and our point of view person is a writer, so she's sitting there and she's kind of observing people so she can write them down and create them as characters into whatever she's going to write soon. And then all of a sudden there's a scream from somewhere in the library. The library gets locked down so they can figure out where the scream came from. Even when I only read 12 books in a month, my battery still dies while I'm talking about the last book. So, library's locked down because somebody screams, somebody's trying to figure out what happened, and as that's happening, the people at the table with her start talking to each other about what could have happened. They kind of feel bonded by this situation, and they make pretty fast friends. They end up going for coffee after that type of thing. Nobody's really found at that point, but then later in that day, somebody is found, and they kind of try to figure out amongst themselves, like, how this happened. Interspersed with chapters of that are notes from this guy named Leo. Now Leo is reading this book as though it's a manuscript written by this Australian writer that he already has a connection with, that he already reads for anyway, and then he's giving his perspective on different things, like using different Australian slang, and you should probably use some American slang if it's set in America and the characters are American, that type of thing. And his opinions of what's going on in this book kind of shape things a little bit, and then his whole side story also progresses. If you go into this book not knowing that there's a story within a story and that's not something that you're super interested in, I can understand why people would kind of feel like this was a bait and switch. I really like the story within a story trope. I used to love it when I would do plays and there would be a play within a play moment and that type of thing. So this really worked for me. However, I know that if you're expecting just the first story and then you're suddenly getting this second story, you might wonder why this is happening. However, I absolutely loved that aspect of it, so to each their own. Kathy, who's too lazy to put her camera on a tripod here. So, funny story. I sat down, I started getting all the images for all of the things that I was going to have to talk about in the video. I was putting the video files on my computer so I could start editing them, and as I went back in my weekly wrap-ups and just started grabbing cover images, I was like, wait a second, Warm Bodies is a cover image from like 3 weeks ago, and it wasn't on my spreadsheet. So sometimes when you're traveling, you don't update your spreadsheet properly and you actually have 13 books. Now, am I going to go back and redo all of the stats for the month? No, I'm not. Is it funny that this makes it a 13th book and it's the spookiest number on the spookiest month? Yes, that is funny. So, Warm Bodies. Going into it, if I had been told 5 years previously when Paige told me to read this book that this was a Romeo and Juliet retelling, I forgot. So it wasn't until I got to 100 and page 27 and the balcony scene that I was like, wait a second, her name is Jules or Julie or something like that. His name is R. There's this balcony scene. Oh my goodness. They're 2 households, both alike in dignity. Oh, okay. So it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling, but with zombies. And yeah, it was entertaining. There were certain aspects of it that I was like, did we really need to do that? But overall, I found it pretty funny, and now I'm going to have to watch the movie because I would really like to know how they put it on the big screen and what kind of elements they brought in visually for the whole Romeo and Juliet type of thing. I did have some problems with the relationship just because historically, if the guy is the literal monster, it's always completely fine, but as soon as you have a woman who's a literal monster, there's not usually like a romantic thing that goes on between them, and that's a little bit of a weird double standard for me. Also, the fact that she is a teenager and his body, when he died, is somewhere in his 30s. We don't know how old he is, we don't know how long it's been since he died. There's problems to be had, basically. But looking past that, I did enjoy this. And yeah, I should learn to make my coffee before I record videos. I honestly thought to myself I should have some coffee, and then I was like, no, because then I'm gonna have to brush my teeth so they don't look terrible in this video. So either you get my beautiful teeth or you get my good thoughts. Those are the two options. If you want to hear me talk more about these books or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these or you're planning to read any of these, please let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down in the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye! Speaking of coffee, it's definitely time for me to make some so I can edit this.